This is Carolina This Week. Carolina This Week with Tim McGinnis.
Good Sunday morning. Thanks for joining us. The 2012 GOP presidential campaign season is really heating up. Of course, big news out of Myrtle Beach is we're going to be hosting a debate in Myrtle Beach in January of next year, January 16th, 2012 to be exact. Yesterday, former House Speaker and current 2012 GOP presidential contender Newt Gingrich stopped by the studio for an exclusive interview. Here's a look. Mr. Speaker, thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk with me this morning.
It's great to be back with you again.
I'd like to talk about the obvious first, which is the economy. This October has turned out to be actually a pretty good October as far as the markets go. Do you think that this is in spite of the president or because of policies that are in effect right now?
Well, I think it's largely in spite of the president, but it's partly responding to the fact that Europe hasn't collapsed, and people were really factoring in the very real possibility that Europe would collapse under the weight of the Greek bankruptcy and the potential Italian and Spanish bankruptcies. I think also there's a big difference between the market, which is money on Wall Street, and the rest of the country. And when you look at unemployment, you look at housing prices, we still have an enormous distance to go to get back to being healthy.
Jobs, that's something that everybody in this area is talking about with high unemployment rates. Parts of our viewing area have the highest unemployment rates in the state, and the state's one of the worst as far as states go, as far as unemployment goes. If you're president, what are you going to do to give the jobless jobs?
Well, I think you start with creating an energy policy where South Carolina could develop offshore the natural gas that it has, which the estimate is $29 billion sitting right offshore, which would create jobs, and then take part of the revenue from that and use it to modernize the port at Charleston so it can take ships when the Panama Canal widens in 2014. So you again create more jobs. And then, frankly, fire the current National Labor Relations Board so Boeing can focus on creating even more jobs in the North Charleston area. And then I think you want to have a policy of repealing Dodd-Frank, which is a bill which is killing small banks, killing small business, killing housing. And if you repeal Dodd-Frank overnight, every small bank in the state would be able to start making loans to businesses, be able to help small businesses get started up again. If you repeal Obamacare, you immediately allow small businesses to start hiring people, because everywhere I go, small businesses tell me they're not going to take the risk of hiring new people when they don't know what Obamacare is going to do to their health insurance cost. So each of these steps begins to change things pretty dramatically.
This is a small business mecca. We have tons of small businesses along the Grand Strand, and there are a lot in the PD as well. Do you think that, are they being taxed too much? Is there anything you would do to payroll taxes?
Well, I keep the cut that is there right now, and then frankly for younger Americans, I would allow them to have the choice of a personal Social Security savings account that they would control, that would build up interest for them, and that would also add a great deal of capital to the American system. But I think for a lot of small businesses, one of the things I favor strongly is going to 100% expensing. So any new equipment you buy, whether you're a factory or a farm or a doctor or a restaurant or an office, if you buy new equipment, you can write it off in 1 year. And the goal is to make the American worker the most productive, the most creative worker in the world. And I think that's a very key part of this.
I want to talk about taxes. We've heard of Herman Cain's 999 plan. Recently, Governor Perry came out with his postcard plan. What is the Gingrich plan? I understand an optional 15% flat tax is part of this?
Yeah, let me say first of all, anybody who wants to can see all the details by going to my first name. Our site is newt.org, and we have there a 21st century contract with America outlined. But in addition, I think people, very straightforward on taxes. Zero capital gains so that you have huge influx of new money to build factories, to build businesses, to create wealth. Second is a 12.5% corporate tax rate, and we're designing a way that that would also apply to subchapter S corporations so that every small business would get a tremendous tax break. And would be encouraged, if you're a corporation overseas, to bring your money back home. We think it would bring home about $700 billion of new money that's currently locked up overseas. Third, as I said, is to go to 100% expensing so that everybody would be able to buy the newest equipment in the world. The fourth is to go to abolish the death tax permanently so that we don't punish people for spending their whole lifetime doing the right thing, saving, working, being frugal. And that means you want businesses that are successful to focus on growth and job creation, not focus on trying to avoid the estate tax. Finally, as you said, we have an optional flat tax. This is something I've looked at for a long time, and it goes back to Hong Kong and the way in which Hong Kong has operated. They've always had, they've had two taxes. So, and it's been very successful in Hong Kong. So the way it would work is you'd sit down and say, all right, I want to keep all of the various deductions and the paperwork and pay my accountant and pay my tax attorney, or I want to fill in, this is what I earned. This is a $12,000 per person deduction. I get the earned income tax credit if I'm very poor. I get the child tax credit. I can take my home mortgage deduction and my charitable deduction. That's all I take. Now, this is the amount I owe. And we think that a significant number of people will like doing that and will favor that kind of approach. But it puts power in your hands because you get to decide which of those two you want.
Would these tax cuts, and even with a 15% optional flat tax, would that decrease revenue to the point that it would be nearly impossible to get out of the debt crisis we're in right now, just in the short term?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I always listen to these discussions about the deficit with some, I guess, amusement might be the right word. I am the only Speaker of the House in your lifetime to author 4 straight balanced budgets. We paid off $405 billion in debt. We did it first by getting the economy growing. Unemployment dropped from 5.6 to 4.2%. Second, by reforming entitlements. 2 out of 3 people on welfare went to work or went to school. Third, by controlling spending. Fourth, by controlling regulation and red tape. And that was with a liberal Democrat in the White House. So if we could get to a balanced budget with Bill Clinton, imagine how much easier it would be to get to a balanced budget if you had a president who actually wanted to get to a balanced budget. So I start with the idea, I'm not trying to finance the current government. I want to shrink the current government. I want to return power back home under the 10th Amendment. I want to reform the entitlements. I want to rethink how we run the government. When you get through doing that, I think you need much fewer taxes than you have today, because today we're trying to sustain a very bloated, bureaucratic, big system in Washington that frankly can't get the job done and shouldn't be there.
What do you think about the House of today as opposed to the House that you were a part of back in the 90s? It seems like there's some definite similarities.
There are some similarities. I think the challenge is, and this may surprise you, but Bill Clinton was actually dramatically easier to negotiate with than Barack Obama. Clinton was from Arkansas, and he was sort of practical, and he'd been governor for 12 years, and he had negotiated with the state legislature. He understood the process of negotiation. And while he could be infuriating, he could also be charming. And so he and I spent day after day negotiating. We would argue like crazy. It was a little bit like 2 graduate students, candidly, because we both like books and we like ideas. But gradually out of all that, we could forge an agreement. When we passed welfare reform, half the Democrats voted for welfare reform, half voted against it. So we literally split the Democratic Party. When we passed the balanced budget, we got a majority of Democrats to vote for it. I mean, so you had to work at it, but you could get a lot done. I really don't envy John Boehner. I mean, I think Speaker Boehner, I don't know how I would try to deal with Barack Obama. I think he's very radical. I think he's very inflexible. I think he doesn't understand the Constitution. He doesn't appreciate that while the House Republicans need a president to sign something, the president needs them to pass something. You know, and Bill and I always understood if we didn't pass it, he couldn't sign it. And if he didn't sign it, it wasn't going to be law. So we had a balance of tension, exactly what the Founding Fathers intended, that was very different. And I think the House has a harder time today.
You can watch the rest of my interview with Newt Gingrich next week on Carolina This Week.